The ocean is a beautiful place, isn't it? Today, I bring you a collection of 3 stories that will make you think twice before walking on the beach at night again, or worse, before staring at the horizon. Before we dive completely into these turbulent waters, if you're passionate about psychological horror, unsolved mysteries, and stories that will keep you up at night, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and become part of this community of curious minds. Now then, get comfortable, turn off the lights, and prepare yourselves. Because after hearing this, the water won't seem so clear anymore. It was 1743 when I discovered I couldn't die. I was born into slavery in 1720 in the London neighborhood of Southwark. In 1724, a fire burned my master's house to ashes. To pay for the rebuild, he had to sell all his slaves, at least the ones still alive. It was at an auction that my worst nightmare came true. A landowner from Bristol bought my parents, but not me. He said I was too small to work the fields and didn't want to feed and clothe me for years until I grew. So, as my parents screamed and struggled, they were loaded onto a cart and taken away. And I was left behind. I never saw them again. It could have been worse. Someone with fewer scruples might have bought me and worked me to death. Luckily, I was bought by a woman in her 50s named Imogen Harris. She wasn't a plantation owner or anything like that. Her husband had died, and her 2 sons served in the Royal Navy. She just wanted company. Living with her was the closest thing to happiness I ever knew. She taught me to read, to cook, and every night we made dinner together. Then she'd tell stories or we'd just chat about anything. When I turned 12, Mrs. Harris let me apprentice as a blacksmith. I spent 8 years in the forge, mostly making chains and bayonets. Then her health started failing. Soon I was caring for her full time. I did everything I could. But all good things end. She died in 1742, and I was sold again. In the colony of Delaware, they needed blacksmiths. Since I had experience, they put me on a ship with 9 other slaves. I'm sure you've heard stories about how slaves were transported, chained side by side, lying on boards. That wasn't my experience. This wasn't a slave ship, but a cargo vessel. They locked us in the hold. Weeks passed, with nothing but hard bread and water. They let us out one by one to relieve ourselves. The rest of the time, locked inside. Scorching heat during the day, freezing cold at night. When 3 of us died, we knew we had to do something or we'd all die. Every day at noon, the crew brought food. 2 men with muskets guarded the door, while a 3rd handed out the rations. The plan was simple. We'd all rush them when they opened the door, take their weapons, and seize the ship. Worst case, they'd kill 2 of us. Right? The moment came. We heard footsteps approaching the door. We got ready, but we jumped the gun. The second the door opened and the first man stepped in with the bread, we lunged. That gave the men with muskets time to step back and fire. 2 direct hits. There were 5 of us left. They ran up to the deck and we followed. When we got topside, I realized our huge mistake. We thought those 2 were the only ones armed. The whole crew had weapons, more than a dozen aimed right at us. I expected them to shoot us dead on the spot. Instead, they forced us to sit and picked one of us to make an example of. As you might have guessed, they picked me. In front of the others, they chained my wrists and ankles and wrapped heavy chains around my chest and shoulders. Then they threw me overboard. I started sinking immediately. The chains saw to that. For the first time in my life, I was underwater, not used to holding my breath. I lasted almost a minute before I couldn't anymore. Salt water flooded my throat, burning like you can't imagine. I stopped fighting and waited for it to end. But it didn't end. I should have died in minutes, but somehow I kept living. I felt the impact of the ocean floor. We must have been in shallow water because sunlight reached down enough to see around me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't sleep. The cold of the water. The only thing I felt was the burning of salt in my lungs and throat, non-stop. All I could do was watch the sun cross the sky again and again. 10 days passed. Do you know what it's like not to eat for 10 days? 25 days. The ship probably reached Delaware. I wonder what the crew said when they expected 10 slaves and only 4 arrived. 75 days. Hunger and thirst peaked. I guess that's a good thing. 200 days. I thought I'd waste away and maybe get free, but no. I stayed exactly the same. 365 days. By then I'd accepted that I was in hell and it would never end. This was my punishment for cursing God after Mrs. Harris died. 500 days. I started wishing she'd never bought me. Because of her, I was at the bottom of the ocean. She was always kind, treated me like a son, but she never bothered to set me free. If she had, none of this would have happened. She was no better than the rest. 1,000 days. By then, I stopped thinking about the past. It was pointless. I was here, and I'd be here forever. I just counted. 2,000 days. 5,000. 10,000. 50,000. 96,729. Then something new happened. I could make out 2 figures moving in the water above me. They weren't fish. They were struggling not to hit me. They were human shapes. No idea what they were doing so far out at sea, but I knew that if I got their attention, maybe they could free me. So I started thrashing, kicking up a cloud of sand. It worked. The shadows got closer until I could see their faces. 2 women in what I now know are diving suits. When they realized what they were looking at, both grabbed me and started pulling me up. It took a while, mostly because of the chains. Finally, we reached the surface. I breathed for the first time in over 250 years. The sunlight was unbearable after so long in darkness. I squeezed my eyes shut, but it didn't help much. One of the women shouted to someone. I heard splashing, and seconds later, I was being dragged through the water, then lifted onto a solid surface. For the next few minutes, I coughed up water and plenty of blood. The air burned my lungs almost as much as the salt water had. Finally, I opened my eyes. I saw I was in a boat, but unlike any boat I'd ever seen. Bright and white. It glided across the water without sails, moving away from land in the distance. No one was steering it. The 2 women sat with a man, talking. I caught fragments. Radar shows no other boats for at least 10 miles. How the hell did he get out here? Look at those chains. He must have been down there for years to get rust like that. You realize how insane that sounds, right? They kept talking. I stopped listening. I was too busy enjoying the fresh air in my lungs. Then one of the women knelt beside me and started cutting the chains with a knife. The rust made it quick. When she stood up and went back to talking with her companions, I caught myself staring at her bare calf. The hunger had faded sometime underwater. It had become constant, like breathing is for most people. But looking at her smooth, bare leg, it all came back with a new fury, an inescapable, terrifying emptiness. I grabbed her ankle and sank my teeth into her flesh. She screamed. The others screamed too when I tore a chunk out of her leg and swallowed. In that moment, it was the best thing I'd ever tasted, but it wasn't enough. I pulled her to the ground and bit again, this time in the neck. Immediately, I heard 3 gunshots and felt explosive pain in my side and arm. I looked up. The man was aiming a pistol at me. The bullets hurt, but they couldn't kill me any more than the water could. When he saw I was still alive, he lunged at me and started pushing me toward the stern, toward the water. With strength that only terror can give, I managed to throw him overboard. The other woman, who didn't want to be left alone with me, tried to jump after him, but I grabbed her and pulled her away from the edge. She fell backward and hit her head on the corner of a chair. Blood started flowing from the wound, and she didn't move again. With nothing stopping me, I started eating again. After 5 bites, I vomited. Blood and chunks of meat fell onto her cooling body. But the hunger was uncontrollable. I kept eating. I threw up several more times before I finished the first girl. With the second, I took my time. She wasn't dead yet, just unconscious, so she was still warm. I didn't finish her. The hunger calmed enough for me to stop. Then I understood the enormity of what I'd done. I'd killed those 2 women, and that man would probably die in the water. If I wasn't cursed before, I sure was now. But God had abandoned me long ago. Why follow his commandments after everything he put me through? I started searching the boat. I found several jugs of water and emptied them all, and a bag of clothes. The man's, I guess. I took off my rotten clothes, wiped the blood from my face, and put on his. When I looked in a mirror, I noticed I hadn't aged a single day since they threw me off the ship. I still looked about 23 years old. Soon after, the boat reached the shore. The beach was empty. I ran, wanting to get as far from that boat as possible. Hours later, wandering through the city, I came back to the beach to see if anyone had found it. As I approached, I saw a crowd and flashing red and blue lights. Dozens of men in black with guns on their belts surrounded the boat. I didn't stick around. I realized now I was too hard on Mrs. Harris. Even though her failure to free me led to all of this, she taught me to read, and that's been invaluable in this new world. I spend most of my time in libraries, learning how the world has changed over centuries. The technology is amazing. We can talk to people on the other side of the world in real time. When I was a kid, sending a message like that took months. I often think about the fact that I'll never die. Sometimes it excites me. I'll get to see what the world looks like hundreds of years from now. Other times it terrifies me. I can't have lasting relationships. My partners will age and die, but I won't. What if some catastrophe wipes out all life on the planet and I'm left alone on a dead world forever? I'm not sure how I'll fill eternity, but there's one thing I know for certain. I'm never getting back into the ocean. About 3 years ago, I was a science reporter aboard a North Atlantic research vessel, the Baseline Explorer. We were about 12 miles off the coast of Bermuda. I was about to descend in a 2-person submersible, something I'd dreamed of since I was a kid. The pilot was a deep-dive veteran named Percy. Great guy, great sense of humor. He talked with that slow Texas drawl, and even his nonsense sounded wise. His first words to me were, "Ever been down in one of these?" "Never." I grinned, excited as a child. I was practically shaking. "You never forget that," he assured me. In hindsight, that's the best prediction I've ever heard. Those submersibles weigh about 8 tons. They're equipped with state-of-the-art scientific gear and huge spotlights mounted right in front of the acrylic cockpit bubble. They're incredibly maneuverable, even at extreme depths. They can spin 360 degrees in a tight space, and they have a big hydraulic arm the pilot controls with a joystick. I watched Percy move that arm with such skill that I swear to God, he could have taken a pacifier out of a baby's mouth without waking it. When he wasn't piloting, Percy liked to play video games in the ship's lounge. We beat countless levels of Call of Duty. Trust me, for an old-school guy, he was incredibly good. And the craziest part? He was 58 and had 6 grandkids. Percy was a great guy, but after that dive, my first, his 103rd, he was never the same. None of us were. Submersibles are engineering marvels. They can withstand up to 200 atmospheres of pressure, 25 times greater than on the surface. That's like stacking 12 huge passenger jets on top of an ant. I'll never forget the feeling of climbing through the hatch into the cockpit bubble. I was scared. I knew what was coming, but I hadn't realized how small the bubble would be. It gave me claustrophobia, like climbing into a dryer. But once I was seated, it wasn't so bad. The panoramic glass offered a better view of the world than the bridge. Still, when the ship's crane lowered us into the water, I couldn't help but wonder if I was seeing the sun for the last time. I was nervous about the trip. My editors wanted a video feature about the dive, and we were going down almost to the sub's depth limit, about 1,000 meters. Suddenly, everything felt terrifying, but Percy calmed me down right away. He'd descended over 100 times. According to him, it was safer than walking to the corner liquor store. As the sub descended, it felt like we were floating still in an eternity of blue space. But Percy assured me we were still going down, the water getting bluer, darker. The second sub followed us like a ghost, piloted by an Israeli named Avia, a stoic son of a bitch. He'd been on board for 3 weeks, and I never once saw him smile. We called him the Machine. The name fit perfectly. At first, he'd flashed us with his spotlights, and sometimes Percy talked to him on the radio during the descent. But those were purely professional conversations. The Machine wasn't the friendly chat type. My job as second pilot was to keep the glass from fogging up, so every few minutes I wiped the inside of the acrylic bubble. The rest of the time, I recorded and narrated everything I saw. At about 200 meters, we started leaving the epipelagic zone, the sunlight zone, and entered the twilight zone. The ocean turned a deep aquamarine, like the sky before dawn. We saw a moray eel gliding through the cone of our spotlights, a school of groupers floating around us like silver confetti, and the machine signaled us a couple of small tiger sharks that followed for a while and then vanished into the dark. We reached nearly 1,000 meters. Total darkness. We were in the midnight zone. Not a single photon of light can penetrate that deep. Our spotlights were the only illumination. We were about to start the ascent when suddenly Percy stopped moving completely. We just hung there. What's wrong? Percy's face had gone rigid, all color drained from him. His lips trembled like he was muttering something, a tense expression, a stare so fixed I knew something was wrong. Percy reached out and turned off the spotlights. "There's something there," he whispered. I don't know how to describe the effect those words had. You can repeat what someone said, but it's hard to convey how they said it. The way Percy said, "There's something there." It sent ice straight down my spine. He was terrified. All we could hear was our own breathing as we both stared into absolute darkness. There really was something. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Something was watching us. I'd never experienced anything like it. Back then I was an atheist, but afterward I'd describe it as a religious experience. I have no idea what I meant by that. I was in shock. I didn't even understand my own words. "What is it?" I barely recognized my own voice. It had gone high-pitched and childish. I grabbed Percy's arm. "What's out there?" I turned to look at him. He had no expression. He was so terrified that his gaze didn't just give you chills, it made you shudder. The instrument lights cast patterns on his face. Shadows ate his flesh. His eyes were yellow and glassy with horror. What the hell could scare a guy like Percy? He was tough as nails, an adrenaline junkie. But right then, he looked like a condemned man on his way to the gallows. I turned back and stared at the bubble. The darkness was so deep it seemed to absorb my thoughts. What was out there? Why was I shaking with this incomprehensible terror? It felt like an omen of death. The beams of the second sub spotlights cut through the darkness beside us. The machine, unaware of what we were feeling, maneuvered to figure out why we'd stopped cold. "Kill the lights," Percy whispered, his voice strangled with panic, and then he lunged forward and flipped the radio switch. "Avia, turn off those goddamn lights." But it was too late. The spotlights illuminated something in the darkness below us, and until the day I die, I'll regret being able to make out what was there. It's haunted my dreams ever since. I've ruined 3 marriages, been through an army of therapists, tried to kill myself 3 times, and I'm hooked on opioids and booze, and I still can't get that image out of my head. At first, I thought I was looking at a luminous disk of enormous size. I'd say 3 times the diameter of our sub, about 20 feet across. It was silver in texture, smooth and slightly faceted. Bands of light radiated from a circle of absolute blackness in the center of the disk. I can't describe that blackness. It was darker than the absence of light. It was the goddamn absence of hope. 3 years before blowing his brains out, Percy called me. "It was like looking at nothing," he said. "Absolute zero. It wrecked my goddamn mind." He was crying as he talked. He was in a horrible state. His wife left him. His kids disowned him. He lost the house, the job, his dignity, and finally, his will to live. Nietzsche once said, "When you look long into an abyss, the abyss also looks into you." That's what I felt looking at that black circle. Like it was looking back at me. I saw it for maybe a second before the machine killed his spotlights. But in that second, there was an eternity. A feeling of falling into emptiness, of being sucked into darkness, of slowly going insane. It was an eye. That disc with the black circle in the center was a goddamn eye, 20 feet across. And to this day, my skin crawls remembering it. That colossal eye staring at us from the dark. The intensity of that stare was beyond human comprehension. It was intelligence measured on a scale of zones. It was an evil beyond scripture, beyond reason. And it turned its eternal gaze on us, and we were cursed, wounded, destroyed by it. God help us. Then the machine killed his spotlights, and the darkness hid that horrible vision. But not the memory. I felt a despair like no other. A black terror filled my heart. That eye. Lord Jesus, how big was the monster it belonged to? It was something biblical. I didn't need to look at Percy to know he felt the same. That eye didn't belong to any rational or natural creature. It wasn't scientific. It was a monster. It was the mother of all nightmares that make our kids wake up screaming. And as I thought this, Percy whispered, "Cursed be he who curses the day, who can wake Leviathan." And it seemed to me that Dead Man was quoting scripture. I kept staring into the darkness. I knew that eye was still watching us. Even though I couldn't see it anymore, I felt the crushing weight of its gaze, submerged in horror, making guttural sounds, trying to speak without words. I was trapped. I wanted to run and hide, but sitting in a tiny sub 1,000 meters underwater, there was nowhere to go. The radio crackled. The machine was saying something, but I wasn't listening. I kept staring into that accursed darkness. Something was moving in there. I could feel it, like a mountain turning its ancient face toward us. I felt the terrifying gravity of that monster turning, and the most horrifying images flashed through my mind. A mass grave with bodies not quite dead yet, a wolf gnawing off its leg caught in a trap, gaunt children behind a barbed wire fence, refugees caught on border concertina wire, screaming for help. I pulled my hair and hit my head, but the images got worse, and my brain felt like a huge, pulsing blood clot. I heard Percy howling in pain and terror. I heard my own screams coming from 1,000,000 miles away. And then the images stopped abruptly. I sobbed convulsively and, turning to Percy, screamed, "Get us out of here!" He shook his head. "Look," he said. Something appeared in the darkness beyond. A crack was opening in the inky void, from which burst a fiery glow that lit up the surrounding ocean. Before my eyes, the crack widened more and more until it opened nearly 100 feet wide, maybe more. That infernal glow filled my entire field of vision. It was the color of flames and post-nuclear sunsets. And looking into that abyss, I swear to God I saw hell itself, filled with tormented souls. All my therapists said it was a hallucination, but Percy and the machine saw it too. The crack opened into a cave of impossible dimensions, so huge that whole mountain ranges could fit inside it, lakes of fire, rivers of boiling blood, molten rain that burned as it fell from thick, sulfurous yellow clouds. And I saw multitudes, thousands and thousands of screaming souls being grabbed by enormous winged beasts and thrown into those lakes of fire. The winged creatures were hideous to behold, some kind of hybrid. They carried pitchforks and red-hot irons. Some had bird heads on human bodies. Others were monstrous reptiles. But all of them, I could feel, were filled with black hatred for humanity. Percy was screaming the Lord's Prayer, and I remember my mouth hanging open in horror. Tears ran down my face, and then that horrible crack slowly closed. I think that was the moment I realized I'd been staring straight into that creature's mouth. I don't remember how we got back to the surface. I only remember that once aboard the ship, they had to handcuff me to the cot in sickbay. I wouldn't stop screaming. They put me in diapers. I couldn't even control my bowels. I spent 3 days in sickbay, screaming and soiling myself until I went catatonic. The machine hanged himself a week after getting home. His wife found him. He left a note. One word in Hebrew. Leviathan. I'm trying to move on. It's been 6 years, and I'm alone. The days are better, but I fear the coming of night, sinking into sleep, just like we sank into that abyss, terrified of what's waiting for me in my nightmares. I never went back to the ocean. I've always loved the sea. Not that I'm a sailor or anything, but I grew up on the coast, so I always felt a connection to it. My wife and I had our first date on the beach, and after coming back from overseas in the 70s, we bought our first house right on the coast in Wales. In that house, for 38 years, we raised 2 kids, 4 grandkids, 5 dogs, and 1 stray cat. It was a good life. I don't regret a single minute. Not even when I watched my wife suffer with her lungs. Not even when I fell asleep on the sofa and woke up to find her cold in her chair. Losing her was the hardest trial of my life. I always told her that life without her wouldn't make sense. I never thought I'd have to face it. The doctors said it was a pulmonary embolism, which is a bitter irony. How many years did I smoke? God, almost my whole life. And I never saw her so much as look at a cigarette. The doctor said it wasn't related, but that's not the point. The point is that I smoked, drank, and ate junk. She got up early to exercise with the same VHS tape for nearly 25 years. We kept the VCR just so she wouldn't have to change her routine. Even now, it seems so absurd that she died first and so young. I thought she'd make it to 100, like her mother. But life's funny. The year after her death, I spent fighting a dark cloud in my head. My kids worked hard to keep me afloat, making sure I did the basics, like eating and bathing. The first few months, I lived in a fog, barely knowing who I was talking to. Everything changed when that girl showed up. I was sitting on my bed, about 2 months after the funeral, when I heard a scream. It was around 1 in the morning. I wasn't sleeping much those days, but that scream, it was horrible. It wasn't a scream of panic. It was a howl of agony, a short burst of indescribable pain. Before I could process it, I was limping through my backyard in my bathrobe, yelling into the wind-whipped darkness. I reached the edge of my property, where it turns into a small forest before the sandy beach, and there I stood, trembling with fear and confusion. So scared and disoriented that I kept yelling, "Is anyone there?" All I saw that night were the trees lit up by my flashlight, like sticks of white chalk on a black slate. I told myself it was probably just a fox, but I knew perfectly well what a fox sounds like, and it wasn't that. The next morning, at dawn, I went out to look. I walked through the forest until I reached the open beach. The tide was starting to come in, and the wet sand reflected the low winter sun. I quickly found a small circle of ashes near the trees, away from the water. Kids often come out to drink and smoke, so I figured some group had been there that night. There was nothing around except dead crabs, scraps of wood, and a noisy flock of seagulls. At first, I didn't pay them any attention, but as I scanned the horizon, I saw a flash of color among their flapping wings. I hurried over and scared them off. They were fighting over her. It was horrible. I immediately knew she was the one who had screamed. I don't think she was more than 13, though the police aren't sure because they still don't know who she was. Her backpack, it looked like it belonged to a smaller girl. Probably some older boy invited her out, and she snuck off without her parents knowing. They do it all the time. I did it myself as a kid. Sometimes, when I have nightmares, I still see that pile of shapeless, seaweed-covered flesh. My oldest son scolded me a bit for going alone, but the police thanked me for the call. For weeks, that girl's death wouldn't leave me alone. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I called the police every day for a week, hoping to learn something, but they wouldn't tell me anything. It's not like I expected good news. I knew better than that. But some kind of answer. When I didn't get one, I started waiting every night in my backyard, hoping I might see something. A part of me, deep down, even hoped I could stop whatever hurt her and go down a martyr in the process. After several weeks with nothing but wind, I started walking the beach every morning, dreading finding another victim. I felt like I was the only one who cared. I know that's not true, but in that house, alone, it felt like I was the only one at least trying to keep it from happening again. It was during one of those walks that I saw the line for the first time. I didn't know what it was. It looked like a piece of seaweed, a swollen mass of algae on the wet sand, like a chewed-up loogie, with a black stalk as thick as my wrist running straight into the sea. I stared at it for a while, horrified by the smell and how it seemed to writhe and bubble in the air. I thought it was some kind of strange, never-before-seen animal. I was about to walk on, but something about that oily, blister-covered surface caught my curiosity. I grabbed a nearby stick and poked it. I wasn't ready for what happened. I don't think anyone would be. The mass just disappeared. First I heard a loud snap, then a splash, then a breeze on my face, and then I was staring at a crater in the sand. I can't convey how fast that thing moved. By the time my brain registered its absence, it was already gone. I didn't even see it move. It just vanished. Like someone edited the video to make it disappear between frames. At first, I filed it away as a strange experience. I figured it had nothing to do with everything else, and I wasn't in a great mental state, so I forgot about it. I kept waiting to find out what happened to that girl, and that thing was probably just some weird fish. But the next day, on my morning walk, it was back. This time feathers were sticking out of it. As I got closer, I saw the half-alive, mangled body of a seagull. It looked horrible. The bird was shrieking over and over, and the cruel, half-broken flapping of its wings made an awful noise. I didn't know what was wrong with it. I thought maybe it was trapped. When I bent down to free it, I heard the sound of a string tightening. A buzz, then a creak, then a whistle, and I was staring at nothing. It was so strange and shocking that at first I didn't even react. I just stood there, trying to process what I'd seen. After that, I decided maybe I shouldn't walk on the beach in the mornings. I suspected I was going crazy. Weeks passed. My mind was still occupied with that girl. It was a relief not to think about my wife's death. And somehow, by worrying about that poor dead girl, I felt like I was doing something more noble than just taking care of myself. Time went on like that until one morning I woke up and, looking outside, saw my trash cans scattered across the yard. That happens sometimes. Foxes are common, but foxes don't usually move heavy-wheeled trash cans. I'd have trouble dragging them that far myself. I went down and saw all the trash spread out. At first, my heart sank at the thought of cleaning it up. But as I got closer to a can caught in a bush, I suddenly realized it wasn't a trash can at all. It was seaweed again. The way the plastic trash was scattered over and through it, and how shiny and strange it looked, it really resembled a trash bag. It was convincing. And that's what stopped me. That's what scared me. There was even a knot of black seaweed on top, shaped exactly like the knot you tie in a trash bag. And the way it was in the bushes meant someone had made an effort to hide the twisted stalk going back into the woods. I didn't understand any of it. It was creepy, but I was sure that whatever this thing was, it was trying to trick me. Not like a moth tricks a spider with its coloring. No, this was a clever ruse. For a moment, I reached out, ready to poke it and see what happened. Then I heard a creak, the sound of a string tightening, or a board under a foot, the sound of a mechanism cocking before impact. I froze, and then I decided to take a step back. In that instant, something changed in it. It started pulsating, like it had been perfectly still all that time, holding its breath. As I went up the stairs, I glanced out the window. It was gone. Several days passed before I saw it again, long enough to try to forget what happened. I spent the whole day in front of the TV, and at dusk I fell asleep on the couch. I woke up to a draft in the room. The window was wide open and the light was off. The cold air cut to the bone. My knees ached. I wiped the drool off my chin and looked at the clock. 2 a.m. Half asleep, I thought. That's weird. I don't remember turning off the light. My wife always kept a lamp by the couch for reading. I reached for the switch and heard a dull creak. I froze and looked in that direction. It was there, smaller, to have fit through the window. But it was her, coiled around the lamp, motionless, lurking. If not for the moonlight, I never would have noticed it. Its black, slick flesh blended completely with the shadows. I saw the stalk, thick as my arm, crawling across the carpet to the open window. Trembling with horror, I stood up and turned on the light. The switch had a strange black-purple residue. The same slime was now soaked into my carpet, filling the room with the stench of rotting fish and salty sea air. And again, the moment I stepped back, the mass started pulsing, like it was relaxing after a failed trap. I grabbed a newspaper off the table and, furious, walked over and hit it. I didn't know what to expect. The speed. The window frame was literally torn out of the wall. Air rushed in like a shockwave, leaving burn marks on the carpet. That thing moved so fast it nearly set the room on fire, and the newspaper flew out of my hand with such force that it tore the skin off my palm, and my wrist hurt for days. But what scared me most was the feeling that it was trying to catch me. I barely saw it, but I swear, the thing grabbed the paper with its wet tentacles. If I hadn't used an object, it would have grabbed me. After that, I couldn't get the idea out of my head. It was bait, a goddamn fishing lure, intelligent and elaborate, trying to drag me into the sea. I couldn't imagine why, but I figured that when it was done with me, it wouldn't let go. Paranoia set in almost immediately. I started carrying a flashlight everywhere and sealed all the windows tight, but I couldn't shake that horrible feeling. I didn't know anything about it, but it knew enough about me to turn off the light and use the lamp as a decoy. I started checking everything. What if it set a trap with the toilet paper during my nightly bathroom trips? Or with the rug, the bed, the pillows, the clothes? Imagine how many times you wake up with your eyes barely open and do your morning routine on autopilot. But fear wasn't the only thing. The false alarms were worse. How I scolded myself for grabbing something without looking. How I lived in the eternal horror of making another mistake. I knew clearly that only luck had saved me so far, and I kept telling myself that couldn't last. You can't live like that. It wears you out. I just hoped it would all end somehow, and over time I even started to delude myself that the bait had given up on me, thinking I was too smart for it. Looking back now, I realize how ridiculous I was. I underestimated it monstrously. You see, I've always had a soft spot for cats. My wife preferred dogs, but I grew up with cats and always wanted another. One night, very late, I heard a pitiful meowing under the window. There was a storm. You could hear the sea crashing against distant cliffs. At first, I didn't pay it any mind. Cats fight and yowl all the time, but the sound didn't stop. As I listened to that creature's suffering, I couldn't help but think, it'd be nice to have a cat in my old age. I could find it, help it, call the vet in the morning, and maybe it would stay with me. I could already picture a little ginger ball weaving between my feet in the kitchen. God, what an idiot I was. I ran outside and followed the sound. It was almost monotonous, like a church organ. When I found the source, I saw the back half of a cat sticking out of a bush. It looked stuck, trying to get out. I was so tense, so exhausted from insomnia, and rattled by the sounds of pain that I got close enough to almost touch the orange fur. But something inside me resisted. In that moment, I hated that thought. I wanted to help the animal so desperately that I despised the part of me whispering, "What if this is bait too?" I took a deep breath and pulled the branches apart. What I saw plunged me into horror. That thing hadn't even found a live cat, and if it had, it didn't leave it alive for long. It was a shapeless mass, that living blob of tobacco-colored mucus. It had driven long, bony phalanges, like the legs of a disgusting spider, into the poor animal's belly. Before my eyes, those fingers pried the cat's ribs apart and then squeezed, forcing an unnatural groan from its mouth that slowly faded, like a diabolical mechanism playing the cat like an infernal bagpipe. I lurched back and screamed. I nearly vomited. I couldn't stand it. Rage flooded me. I wanted to grab that goddamn bait, rip out whatever was hiding at the other end in the ocean, and make it pay for everything. It took all my strength to hold myself back. That was its genius. It knew exactly which strings to pull. This time, it wasn't trying to trick me, it was provoking me. I held back, but seething with fury, I stood up and shouted, "Get out! Leave me alone!" Hearing that, the cat's body slumped to the ground. When I looked back into the bush, the bait was gone. It had vanished, leaving me with the poor animal's corpse. I buried it that same night, crying the whole time. The next morning, I called my son and asked him to take me to a nursing home away from the sea. Since then, I've just been waiting, ready to leave at any moment, not wanting to take anything with me. It hurt just to look at my belongings. I only wanted one thing, to get out of there. I thought if I got far enough away. But I kept underestimating the bait. My son was supposed to come this morning. He called at noon, a few hours later than promised. He was hysterical, saying over and over that no one understood why. Why? I asked. Why would someone dig her up? Why take her body? And now it's night. My head is pounding, and I'm scared. Scared of what's happening upstairs. Scared of the sound of breaking glass I heard an hour ago, and the strange, dull thud that followed. But what terrifies me most is that when I went up to check what had happened, everything was as usual. I saw the most normal image in the world, the one I've seen thousands of times. My bedroom, the nightlight on, my slippers by the bed, and worst of all, the figure of my wife under the blanket, her chest rising and falling rhythmically as she breathed.